What do you dream for?
That less people have to say goodbye too soon to people they love.
But Elizabeth Holmes's claims turned out to be a $9 billion fabrication. Her company, Theranos, bragged it could carry out 200 diagnostic tests from a pinprick sample of blood, looking for cancer, cholesterol, or syphilis.
This could be the apple of healthcare.
You all are part of something that is going to change our world. What higher purpose is there?
But the reality was they only ever managed to carry out a dozen. And even then, the results were unreliable, outsourced, and often doctored. One patient was told they were HIV positive, and a pregnant woman was told incorrectly she was miscarrying. Holmes has now been found guilty of multiple counts of fraud in one of the most shocking trials of corporate history.
There are missionaries and there are mercenaries. And so some of the founders are missionaries who are able to have this zeal where they can go out and convince lots and lots of people that their way of changing the world is the right way of changing the world. But I think what we have seen in case of Elizabeth Holmes is a combination of a missionary and a mercenary. And that combination turned out to be deadly.
In the wake of the explosion in value for tech companies like Facebook, Google, and Apple, Theranos capitalized on the raw hunger for more. No one wanted to miss out on the next Mark Zuckerberg. She slid seamlessly into the role of darling of the industry.
There are models for doing well by doing good.
Sat next to Jack Ma, she was even praised by presidents.
You founded this company 12 years ago, right? Yeah. Tell them how old you were.
I was 19.
She set up Theranos in 2003 after dropping out of Stanford. In 2013, they signed a deal with Walgreens Boots to install their technology in shops around the US. And by 2015, Theranos is valued at $9 billion, supposedly making her the richest self-made woman in America. But within 12 months, regulators closed down a Theranos lab, saying there was an immediate jeopardy to patients' health and safety. And in 2018, the company was broken up after a series of further raids.
The problem was that when she became fully aware that this technology was not scaling, and she was literally faking results using other machines, at that point she did not have the moral underpinnings of someone who would stop.
Holmes ignored the technology problems and instead redoubled her PR efforts, styling herself on another tech giant, Steve Jobs, copying his fashion choices and even emulating his deep voice.
People don't even know that they have a basic human right to be able to get access to information about themselves and their own bodies.
We all love a genius and we all love potential. And I think that that's what draws people in. There's a whole raft of research suggesting that if you have a proven performer and you have somebody that has a lot of potential but is yet unproven, usually we go for the unproven high potential person because we think the sky's the limit.
She targeted big egos, old men who were the power brokers of the 70s and 80s. Henry Kissinger and George Shultz alongside former General Jim Mattis, latterly brought back under Trump. They were a strange collection of Washington warhorses, whose expertise on science and technology was less clear. Her investors were equally well seasoned, most famously Rupert Murdoch, who lost $100 million or more betting on Holmes. Is investment always rational?
Oh, I think it's always irrational. I really do. My gut tells me that rational investments probably don't yield the sorts of returns that, that make eye-popping headlines. Don't we all sort of, when we invest, hope that it's the next big thing? And that's probably one of the most important parts of the market.
In the first 9 months of last year, almost $100 billion was raised by venture capitalists. And while sophisticated investors may distinguish between missionaries and mercenaries, the reality is that many tech titans display both qualities equally.
Haley Ibrahimi. Well, joining me now is Gerrit de Vink,
the Washington Post technology reporter who is following the case and is based in Silicon Valley. Gareth, thanks very much for coming on the program. How was she able to dupe all these really clever people who supposedly know exactly where to put their money? Gareth, you've muted your mic. Gareth, you've muted your mic. You've got to unmute your mic.
I'm terribly sorry. This is 2 years into the pandemic. I'm still learning this.
You're a technology reporter. What's going on?
To answer your question, I mean, she used
bad. Okay, we're going to start again. Forget. Thank God we sorted that out. How was she able to dupe all these really clever people?
So she used the language of Silicon Valley, that conversation about getting in early, being part of disruptive technology, saying to old industry titans, you don't know what you're talking about. We're going to be disruptive. And she went to people who weren't necessarily in the technology industry, some of those who were highlighted in the excellent report that we just witnessed. And so, a lot of people had seen the wealth that was already being generated in Silicon Valley, and they wanted to take every opportunity to sort of jump in. And it was a time when a lot of companies, not just Theranos, were raising money on promises that were much fluffier than the ones that even she was making.
So is it unfair or fair to describe as the Bernie Madoff of Silicon Valley?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Silicon Valley, throughout this trial, it's been interesting because a lot of the big names in the Valley have been saying she's not one of us. She took money from people who weren't traditional tech investors. She was a healthcare startup. But the reality is she went to Stanford University. Her social circle was very much within that same circle that companies like Facebook, Google had been funded out of. And so at the time when she was gracing the covers of magazines, when she was raising all this money, when she was being feted as the future of sort of the tech and health industry, no one was saying, no one was asking those tough questions within that industry. So I do think that Silicon Valley can't completely wash their hands of Elizabeth Holmes, but it is also true that, she didn't raise money from, the bulk of her investors did come from outside of technology.
And is there a broader spectrum here, broader problem here for Silicon Valley especially, that loves to find the next Steve Jobs, that is more prone to this kind of, snake oil stuff than perhaps even Wall Street is?
Yeah, absolutely. There are cases, Silicon Valley will say, look at Elon Musk. The idea of an electric car has been around for decades. And why didn't GM, why didn't Ford, why didn't Volkswagen create the next, large electric car company? And there was a lot of naysayers, and suddenly he went and did it. And now his company is worth more than many of those car makers combined. And so I think that there is definitely still some truth to the idea that someone really coming from the outside, someone with a very idiosyncratic idea can really disrupt an industry. But for the most part, the people who are in these traditional industries kind of, they do know what they're talking about. Blood testing is a difficult thing that people have been working on for a long time. And I think an important point to note is that when the reporting first came out about these serious questions about Theranos, this was 5 or 6 years ago. And if you look at the last 5 or 6 years in tech reporting, you can see that it's been much more critical. People have asked much tougher questions. You see this most obviously when it comes to Facebook. Look at the Facebook whistleblower going and exposing some of what's going on inside of that company. Look at unionization attempts at Amazon. People do not treat the tech industry the same way that they did in 2013, 2014 with this kind of wide-eyed wonder. And I do think that Theranos was sort of the beginning of that, or one of the important elements that helped break open that sort of sycophantic view towards Silicon Valley.
Gareth de Vink, I'm glad we managed to make the technology work. Gareth de Vink of the Washington Post in Silicon Valley. Thank you very much indeed.